Tommy Robinson rally. When politics turns violent, the shocking truth behind London's largest right-wing march. Right. Before we dive into what might be the most disturbing political footage you'll see this year, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you're going to want notifications on for what's coming next because UK politics just took a very dark turn, and someone needs to tell you the unvarnished truth about it. What I'm about to show you isn't just another political protest gone wrong. This is about the moment when political discourse in Britain crossed a line that, frankly, should terrify every single person who values democracy. We're talking about 110,000 people marching through London, and amongst that crowd, someone openly calling for the assassination of our Prime Minister. Yes, you heard that correctly. Assassination. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Surely that's hyperbole. Surely it's taken out of context. Well, I'm afraid it's not. The footage is crystal clear, the words are unambiguous, and the implications are absolutely chilling. But here's what the mainstream media won't tell you. This isn't happening in a vacuum. This is a culmination of something that's been brewing in British politics for years. And if you think this is just about Tommy Robinson or just about one unhinged supporter, you're missing the bigger, more dangerous picture entirely. Let's start with what actually happened on Saturday. Picture this: thousands upon thousands of people draped in Union Jacks and St. George's flags, marching from Waterloo Bridge to Whitehall. The organizers called it one of the largest right-wing demonstrations in recent memory, and by the sheer numbers alone, they weren't exaggerating. But size, as we all know, doesn't equate to legitimacy, and what unfolded during those hours on London streets should serve as a wake-up call to anyone who's been sleepwalking through the current political climate. In the midst of this sea of protesters, a supporter approaches former Tory councillor and conspiracy theorist William Coleshill, and yes, we need to talk about why a former Conservative councillor is platforming conspiracy theories, but we'll get to that in a moment. The supporter, captured on video that's now gone viral across every social media platform, says something that should make your blood run cold. Someone needs to shoot Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer needs to be assassinated. Now, Coleshill's response is equally telling. Rather than immediately shutting down this violent rhetoric, rather than expressing horror at what is just heard, he suggests that the Labour leader should instead be tried and lawfully executed. Lawfully executed. Let that sink in for a moment. We're talking about the democratically elected Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and former Conservative officials are entertaining fantasies about his execution. But if you think this was just one rogue voice in a crowd of 110,000, you're not grasping the full horror of what we're witnessing. This march wasn't some spontaneous outpouring of legitimate political concern. This was a carefully orchestrated event, complete with international backing and high-profile speakers who knew exactly what kind of audience they were addressing. Speaking of international backing, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or should I say, the billionaire on the video link. Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, addressed these marches via video, criticizing what he called the rapidly increasing erosion of Britain under the current government. Now, I don't know about you, but when foreign billionaires are addressing crowds that include people calling for political assassinations, we might want to ask some serious questions about foreign interference in British politics. And here's where it gets even more disturbing. The march also featured tributes to Charlie Kirk, the American conservative campaigner who died in Utah recently. Lawrence Fox, addressing the crowd, said he was praying for Kirk and made some rather ominous comments about taking a sword to people shutting down, though the audio cuts off there, leaving us to wonder what exactly he was advocating for. But the pattern is clear. American far-right politics, American-style violent rhetoric, and American billionaire backing converging on British streets. Now, if you're enjoying this deep dive into the darker side of UK politics, make sure you're subscribed because we're only scratching the surface here, and there's so much more that needs unpacking. The police response tells its own story, doesn't it? More than 1,000 officers deployed, including mounted units, all tasked with keeping opposing groups apart. But here's what should concern you most. They weren't just dealing with peaceful political protest. Officers were kicked, punched, and pelted with bottles, flares, and other projectiles. The Metropolitan Police's statement was unambiguous. Numerous officers have been assaulted. By 6 p.m., we had men draped in St. George's flag spitting at police officers from the Golden Jubilee footbridges near Embankment. Spitting at police officers. These are the same people who claim to love Britain, claimed to respect law and order, claimed to stand for traditional British values. Yet there they were, literally spitting on the men and women tasked with keeping the peace. And here's the kicker. Despite police setting a 6 p.m. curfew, the speeches and music in Whitehall continued well into the evening. So we have a crowd that includes people calling for political assassination, attacking police officers, and then brazenly ignoring lawful police orders about when to disperse. This isn't political protest. This is something far more dangerous. But let's step back and ask the really uncomfortable questions that no one else seems willing to ask. How did we get here? How did we reach a point where 110,000 people can march through London, and amongst them are individuals openly calling for the murder of our Prime Minister, while former Conservative councillors entertain discussions about lawful execution? The answer isn't simple, and it's not comfortable, but it's necessary. We've spent years normalizing increasingly extreme political rhetoric. We've allowed social media algorithms to radicalize ordinary people by feeding them increasingly extreme content. We've watched as legitimate political grievances have been hijacked by bad actors who profit from division and chaos. And we've failed to call out dangerous rhetoric when it comes from people who claim to be on our side politically. Don't hit that back button yet. We need to talk about what this means for British democracy, because the implications go far beyond one march, one video, or even one political movement. The footage of this assassination call has gone viral, and rightly so. Social media users are calling for arrests, with comments like a jail sentence is in the post, and hope the Met get this man. But viral outrage isn't enough. We need to understand that this represents a fundamental threat to democratic norms that have kept Britain stable for centuries. When political opponents become enemies to be eliminated rather than defeated at the ballot box, democracy dies. When former elected officials entertain fantasies about executing sitting prime ministers, the social contract that holds our society together begins to fray. When 110,000 people can march through our capital while violent rhetoric goes unchallenged by the majority of participants, we're witnessing the mainstreaming of political extremism. And here's what's particularly insidious about this entire situation. It's being packaged as patriotism. These marchers wrap themselves in Union Jacks and St. George's flags while calling for political violence. They claim to love Britain while attacking British police officers. They position themselves as defenders of democracy while openly advocating for the assassination of a democratically elected leader. This is fascism 101, isn't it? Wrap your authoritarian message in the flag. Claim you're the true patriots, and paint your political opponents as existential threats that must be eliminated rather than simply defeated. History is littered with democracies that fell to exactly this playbook, and anyone who thinks it can't happen here clearly hasn't been paying attention to global political trends over the past decade. Now, I know some viewers will accuse me of being biased, of being unfair to Tommy Robinson supporters, of exaggerating the threat. To those people, I say this: watch the footage yourself. Listen to the words being spoken. Look at the violence directed at police officers. This isn't about left versus right. This is about democratic norms versus political extremism. If you found this analysis valuable, you absolutely need to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because mainstream media isn't going to give you this level of honest analysis about what's really happening in British politics. The reality is that we're living through a dangerous moment in British political history. The institutions that have kept our democracy stable for generations under pressure from forces that view democratic norms as obstacles to be overcome rather than principles to be respected. And what we saw on Saturday in London is just the latest and perhaps most disturbing manifestation of this trend. The question now is, what happens next? Will there be arrests? Will there be consequences for those calling for political violence? Will the Conservative Party distance itself from former councillors who entertain discussions about executing prime ministers? Will social media platforms take action against accounts spreading this content? Will the broader political establishment finally recognize that we're facing a crisis that goes beyond normal political disagreement? Because make no mistake, this is a crisis. When you have 110,000 people marching through London, and amongst them are individuals calling for assassination while attacking police officers and ignoring lawful orders, you don't have a political movement. You have something that poses a fundamental threat to democratic society itself. The footage we've discussed today will likely lead to investigations, and rightly so. But investigations and arrests, while necessary, won't address the underlying problem. We have a portion of the British public that has been radicalized to the point where they view political violence as acceptable, even necessary. We have former elected officials who are willing to platform and legitimize this rhetoric. We have international actors pouring fuel on these fires for their own purposes. And perhaps most dangerously, we have a broader political culture that has been too willing to excuse or minimize this extremism when it comes from people who claim to be patriots, who wrap themselves in our flag, who say they love Britain while advocating for the destruction of British democratic norms. The march on Saturday wasn't just about immigration policy or government accountability, or any of the other legitimate political issues that get discussed in normal democracies. This was about power, about intimidation, about creating an atmosphere where political opponents are viewed as enemies to be eliminated rather than fellow citizens with different views. If you're still watching, you clearly understand that this matters. You clearly recognize that what happened in London represents something more dangerous than typical political protest. So do me a favor, subscribe to this channel, because we need to keep having these difficult conversations. We need to keep calling out extremism wherever it comes from, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it challenges people we might otherwise agree with politically. The future of British democracy depends on citizens who are willing to defend democratic norms against those who would tear them down. It depends on people who understand that political violence is never acceptable, regardless of how strongly you disagree with the government. It depends on maintaining the principle that political power comes from votes, not violence. What we witnessed on Saturday was a stress test of those principles, and frankly, too many people fail that test. The question now is whether enough of us will learn from this moment and recommit to the democratic values that have made Britain a beacon of stability in an increasingly chaotic world. Subscribe, stay informed, and let's make sure we're on the right side of history when future generations judge how we responded to this critical moment in British politics.